I'd like to acknowledge the local custodians of the land in which we meet this evening and honour elders past, present and emerging. I'm Melissa Wilkinson from the Hunter New England Central Coast Primary Health Network. Welcome everybody tonight. It's a really important topic and it's going to be a diverse range of speakers, so really looking forward to it. This is a live only event. We're not being recorded. There won't be a copy in the Education Library, so it's a live event only, so I'll just remind you of that. Bit of housekeeping, we will have some polls at the end. That's the survey that we get the feedback to organise other events and base other education on, so I strongly encourage you to please complete that. And there'll also be a time at the end where we'll allow for questions, so if you pop those questions into the questions box, we'll get to those towards the end of the session. It's a great pleasure now to hand you over to Dr. Marie Shea. Welcome and thank you.
Yep, thank you, Mel. Welcome everyone to this webinar that's really important, I think, to our practice. Supporting patients with psychosocial disability to apply for NDIS. For me, this is a dark cave, and this talk will help to shine a light into the dark cave so that when your patient comes in with that thick paperwork to apply for NDIS, you'll know what to do. We want our patients to have meaningful lives that are productive and satisfying, and getting NDIS will really help a lot of our patients to get there. So my name is Marie Shea. I'm a GP at Tanoba Bay Medical Center in Port Stevens. I've been there for 7 years. You can hear my accent. I'm American, and I've loved living in Australia. It's been a fantastic experience to see a healthcare system that works, not like America. And my big interest, and the reason I'm here on this webinar, is because I have a huge interest in the social determinants of health. And that means financial status, their community connection, their neighborhood, environment, education kind of factors. And I've started a social prescribing project in my community. And I encourage you all to look around your community and see all the beautiful things that are out there, the groups, all the support that you have for yourself and for our patients as well. Tonight we're going to have speakers from Uniting, NDIA, and the Hunter New England Central Coast PHN. If you have any questions, you can type them in the question area, and then we'll be answering the questions at the end. So I have the pleasure to introduce Rhiannon, who's from the NDIA. Rhiannon Brody is an assistant director in the National Disability Insurance Agency's Community Engagement National Operations Team. She's based in Sydney. She's worked at the NDIS for 5 years, and over this time has engaged and supported with both community and mainstream stakeholders to help them to understand what the NDIS scheme is and how it interacts with other systems, including opportunities to resolve and identify issues. Rhiannon has previously worked and has a sister, worked in disability advocacy, and has a sister who has a significant intellectual disability. Rhiannon has learned firsthand a lot from her sister, and this relationship has helped shape her own professional career and have a deep understanding of and a passion for ensuring people have access to supports and have ordinary and meaningful lives. Okay, over to you, Rhiannon. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm just gonna just bear with me while I get the slides happening. There we go. Okay, so what is the National Disability Insurance Scheme? It is an Australian government scheme which aims to improve the lives of people living with disability. It provides eligible people, which we refer to as participants with a budget, known as an NDIS plan, to use on services and support, which will help them achieve their goals for independence and to be able to participate in the community and in employment. The NDIS takes a lifetime approach by investing in people early to build capacity over time and improve outcomes later in life. People who have a permanent disability that substantially reduces their capacity to undertake regular daily activities may be eligible for the NDIS, and this includes serious mental health conditions, so known as a psychosocial disability. Around 10% of NDIS participants have a psychosocial disability. People with psychosocial disability often talk about mental health recovery. This is not clinical recovery, which is the absence of symptoms, but rather the goal of re-establishing self-esteem and living a contributing life despite their mental health condition. The NDIS helps people to work towards mental health recovery by offering services and supports to help them participate in the community. And the NDIS aims to do this by enhancing the independence and social and economic participants of people with disability and the people that support them, help build community, provide people with disability choice around services and support, help build community awareness of disability, ensure that the NDIS is financially sustainable, help collect and analyse and exchange data, including with other state and territory governments, and help develop and enhance the disability sector and undertake disability and support research and the outcomes that people are achieving as a result of receiving NDIS funding. So the NDIS Act 2013 is the legislation underpinning the scheme. The NDIS Act enables the scheme, outlines the objectives and principles under which the NDIS will operate, and specifies the rules and regulations for participants, service providers, and the agency when accessing and implementing the scheme. The National Disability Insurance Scheme rules are legislative instruments, so the laws also made under the Act. They support the Act, providing detail in relation to the operations of the NDIS. And the NDIS Act also establishes two independent Commonwealth government agencies. And so that's the National Disability Insurance Agency and also the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. A key principle of the NDIS is that people with a disability have the same rights as all Australians to access community and mainstream services, to determine their best interest and exercise choice and control in decisions that affect their lives. The NDIS is not designed to duplicate or replace existing mainstream services or community supports. And what we mean by community informal supports, these are unpaid supports, including family, friends, and community groups. And the NDIS aims to sustain and strengthen these existing supports, not to replace them. This is considered in detail when developing a participant's individual plan. The other that we work is mainstream services, such as health and GPs that are available to all Australians. And that includes Medicare, dental, hospital, mental health, employment services, housing, and more. And the NDIS will work with other government systems as part of the government's overall strategy for improving the response of mainstream services for people with a disability. So just to put this into a bit of perspective in terms of participants accessing the scheme and people with disability, people in Australia who identify as having some sort of disability. So the 2015 Survey of Disability, Ageing and Carers, the ABS reported that 4.3 million Australians are estimated to have disability, and of that, 18.3% of the population and so the majority, 78.5% of people with disability reported a physical condition, such as back problems, as their main long-term health condition. The other 21.5% reported mental and behaviour disabilities. So of the 4.3 million in Australian with a disability, the NDIS is now supporting just over 518,000 participants as of the 31st of March. And these disabilities that people accessing the NDIS, it could be an intellectual, physical, sensory, cognitive, or psychosocial functioning. And I just thought this would be helpful too. At the moment, across the Hunter New England local government areas or the local health district, it's actually the local government area. So there's 2,389 participants with a primary disability of psychosocial disability accessing NDIS supports. And that's as of 31st of December last year. And the average funding package for this cohort is $91,000. This data is available on our website, and we'll include this in the resource pack. So in terms of the eligibility to join the NDIS, a person who wants to become an NDIS participant needs to show that they meet the access requirements set out in Section 21 of the NDIS Act. There are 3 broad requirements for a person to be eligible for the NDIS, and that is that the person must be under the age of 65 when their request to access the NDIS is made. In terms of a residency, a person must be an Australian citizen, holder of a permanent visa or a protected special category visa. They must meet our disability requirements as well. So that is that a person is likely to meet the disability requirement if they have a disability that is attributable to an impairment, that is permanent or likely to be permanent, and that results in a substantial reduced functioning. If this criteria is met, an access request needs to be made. And particularly with people with a psychosocial disability, particularly in your role as a GP supporting a person further in the process of applying for the NDIS, it is recommended that you explore the eligibility criteria that may make a patient ineligible for the scheme. So it needs to be confirmed first before access is undertaken that they meet all the requirements, and also that we're determining that the person's disability is permanent and significant. It's important to remember that not everyone with disability will qualify for the NDIS. It is only for those who are significantly impacted by their disability. The NDIS states a permanent disability means your disability is likely to be lifelong. A significant disability has a substantial impact on your ability to complete everyday activities. So whilst a person you are supporting who has a disability may be significant, it may not be deemed permanent. If there are treatment options still available and it can be supported through a mainstream service such as the health, mental health, or alcohol and other drug systems. So for example, a first episode of psychosis may be treated by a hospital and/or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. A patient's disability may be permanent but not significant. So for example, they have schizophrenia but are supported by public mental health, have a good GP and can manage their daily lives independently. For these reasons, this person's disability does not significantly impact their daily life and the person would not be eligible. To determine eligibility, it's important to assess the impact of a patient's disability on their day-to-day life. And this conversation can be difficult as it's deficit-based and can be triggering to the patient if the focus is only on what they cannot do. So it's important to consider to assess the impact of a client's disability. And a way to phrase this is about information already known. So if the patient is known to you, or it might be other services that they're connected or family members that can give information, these can be contained to understand how this person is functioning in their day-to-day life, particularly if the patient lacks insight into their own condition. If a patient does not have these links or is not well known to you, this information will be needed to be obtained to determine eligibility and guide further lines of inquiry. And that's something to think about, and we've put that in the resources that other people that you might be talking about to, particularly if you're not sure how their disability is impacting them. One thing too to understand is that the NDIS, we need to have consent of the person, anyone over the age of 18. And if they lack that capacity, then obviously, it might be that they have a public guardian who is or a legally appointed guardian. And it's important to acknowledge that people you support can sometimes have a mistrust of government services or may find the process too difficult or lack insight into their own disability or support needs. You may also find that people you support have limited knowledge about what the NDIS does and what it can provide, and this creates barriers to them initiating an application. Some people will also not identify with the language the NDIS uses and do not identify as having a disability. As psychosocial supports are a later addition to the disability sector, the language of labelling a mental illness as a disability may also be new, confusing and confronting to some people who have worked with external services in a recovery framework. If a person you support is having difficulty with the language the NDIS uses, you can frame questions around the person's thinking that they would benefit or require lifelong support. So that might be, do you think having support to access the community would be helpful to you? And the NDIS recognises that psychosocial disability is episodic in nature and that it is likely to require varying levels of support across a lifetime. So you may want to consider the way questions are phrased. Tell me what you can't do versus what does your case manager help you with. The latter allows for the client to talk, the patient and the client to talk about the support they require without having to name that it is a weakness. And if a person continues to not want to engage or provide consent to access the NDIS and clearly needs high-level disability support, you could consider options such as the need for the guardianship or an administration or, order. But also my colleague Tom from Uniting is also going to be talking about the supports they can provide to assist people to access the NDIS. So the process of applying is through our access request form, and this can be downloaded on our website. And also it can, by calling the 1-800 number, and people can start this process via the 1-800 number by giving us as much details as possible. And if they've got a Centrelink reference number and we can get that verbal consent, we can already start that. So all the information we need is just the supporting evidence. You can also email our National Access team. The access request form is then split into 2 sections. So section 1 is completed by the applicant or someone supporting them. And that has all their name, date of birth and address and their contact details, information about their disability, and also all the consent information that we need. And section 2 is where you would come in as a treating health professional or a GP, and you would be there to fill in that bit to identify any disability or impairment, and what treatment interventions have been completed, any previous assessments that you've done or the person has on file, and then information about their functional impact of their disability. For people applying to access to the NDIS due to their primary impairment of psychosocial disability, you will find the evidence of psychosocial disability the most useful and helpful form to complete. And this evidence form makes it easier for people, and it's been designed by mental health professionals and highly recommended. We still need part 1 of the access request form to be filled in, but for someone with a psychosocial disability, for part 2, it would be submitting the evidence of psychosocial disability form. So in terms of the disability requirements, if you make an access request, you must provide evidence to the NDIA which demonstrates that you have a lifelong disability, you are unable to complete everyday tasks in at least one of the life domain, which I'm about to go through in the next slide, and your disability impacts your social and work participation, and you require lifetime disability support, which is most appropriately provided by the NDIS. And in order for a disability to be considered lifelong, evidence must demonstrate that there are no known available and appropriate evidence-based treatments that would be likely to remedy, so that's cure or substantially relieve. Medical or other treatment would not or would be unlikely to improve the condition. And in deciding likely permanency, the agency considers if there's a possibility a treatment such as surgery has some prospect of success, and the agency should wait until the outcome of the treatment is known. And for multiple impairments, each impairment is considered separately and determined if it's likely to be permanent. And that's something important to, particularly for people with psychosocial disability, is understanding that clinical criteria. So the main focus of the clinical evidence is to show that impairments exist as a result of a mental health condition, and that these impairments are likely to be permanent. In the NDIS, disability is considered to be likely permanent when there are no known available and appropriate evidence-based clinical, medical or other treatments that would remedy the impairment. And clinical recovery is when a person's symptoms are remedied and there is significant functional improvement as a result of the treatments. If there are available treatments likely to result in clinical recovery, the person is unlikely to meet the likely permanent criteria. Personal recovery refers to an individual's journey towards living a productive and satisfying life, whilst living with the impacts of a mental health condition. So if there are available treatments that will support a person's personal recovery, but not their clinical recovery, they are likely to meet the likely permanent criteria. So in terms of about reduced functional capacity, and the information that we need to capture on that access request form needs to be able to be described in at least one of these domains. So an impairment results in substantially reduced functional capacity to perform one or more activities when the person is unable to participate effectively or completely in the activity, or perform tasks or actions required to undertake or participate effectively or completely in the activity without any assistive technology. And the person usually requires assistance, including physical assistance, guidance, supervision or prompting from other people to participate in the activity or to perform tasks or actions required to undertake or participate in the activity the person would need, even if they did have assistive technology. It's deficit-based, so descriptions of what a person cannot do for themselves, and what is the expectations of age-based peers. What is the person unable to do partially or completely? So what that might look like under communication, that's all about how someone's being understood, how they speak, is it written, understanding others and expressing their needs and wants by gesture, speech or context is appropriate to their age. Social interaction, this includes making and keeping friends or playing with, interacting with the community, behaving within limits accepted by others, coping, how do they cope with their feelings and emotions in a social context. Learning includes understanding and remembering information or learning new tasks, practicing and using new skills. Mobility, this means the ability of a person to move around the home and how they undertake that in ordinary activities. Self-care means activities related to the personal care. How do they manage their hygiene, grooming and feeding oneself? And that might include, are they able to do their own shopping, including what that's showering, bathing, eating, and caring for their own health needs. Are they able to get themselves to a health appointment, or do they need someone to assist with that? And self-management, that means the cognitive capacity to organise one's own life, to plan and make decisions and to take responsibility for oneself, including completing daily tasks, making decision, problem solving and managing finances. And usually people with a psychosocial disability, evidence around functional capacity is usually provided under self-care, self-management and communication or social interaction. You might find as a GP that you don't know how a person that you're supporting, who might also have really complex needs, you might not have historical information about what their day-to-day functioning looks like in the community. And that's where you can ask others that might be, whether it's a family member or it might be that they're linked to a specialist homelessness service or other sort of mental health service that's in the community that can provide more detailed information around the functional impact of their disability. That might be getting a support, one of their support workers, if they're connected with one, to be able to provide a support worker letter. There's also many good templates available that helps people to step that through. It might be from a parent or a family member giving a carer impact statement that really confirms the sort of support that they're providing that individual due to the impact of their disability. In terms of the treating health professional that we'd expect that evidence to come from, the form needs to be completed by an appropriate qualified professional who can provide information about a person's clinical history and daily function. A clinical information section A in the form gathers information about the diagnosis or presentation of the mental health condition, any hospitalisation related to the mental health condition, if applicable. So that might be working with your local health district, particularly if they've spent time in a community or have supports from a community mental health team. It might be working with other health systems to be able to gather that evidence or help manage that. We'd be wanting to know past and current treatments for the mental health condition and the likely outcomes of ongoing and future treatment in terms of that clinical recovery. And how do we weigh evidence of that disability? We need enough information in the application to show us that they are eligible for the NDIS by meeting the disability requirements or the early intervention requirements. Sometimes we might need to ask for more information. For example, the NDIS application form might not have enough information about the person's functional capacity. First, we'll try to get information from the application. If this doesn't help, we'll ask the individual or their support or the person that they've put in as their contact person to make sure that we have the full picture. And that might be the treating health professional, such as yourself. We might ask the person for more information if the application doesn't have all the information we need, and we need to answer a particular question. It might be just confirming permanency or the treatment options. In terms of how old your evidence should be, we need evidence from the doctor or specialist to confirm the permanent impairment. People can give us evidence confirming this from any age. However, evidence about how the impairment impacts a person's functional capacity should be from the last 12 months. We do have the ability to be able to prioritise participants that might need access, an urgent access decision. Usually all access decisions, once we've received all evidence and it's an eligible, we've got all that information and we're able to determine that, we've got 21 days to make a decision. But we can, in urgent circumstances, can determine whether a prospective participant meets the access criteria sooner than the timeframe set out in the Act. So urgent circumstances include, but not limited to, so where a prospective participant's accommodation or care arrangements have broken down. They might be in a situation where it's unsustainable or fragile or at risk of breakdown, or it might be that they're about to become homeless, or where a prospective participant is at risk of harm or re-entering a community setting and has few or no supports in place. And we'll provide a bit of a template about how to submit a request for urgent access decision and the sort of information that we need to be provided to support that. And so once submitted that to the National Access team and we have all that evidence, we can be able to determine someone's access within 48 hours, often even less. What happens if a person's not eligible? If a person is deemed not eligible, they can't become an NDIS participant. We will contact the person and if it's not them, the person they've identified to be their contact person on their behalf to explain why they're not eligible. And this is something that you should expect from us. We will give reasons for our decision and also answer any questions someone might have. We'll also send a letter with our decision, including the reason someone is not eligible and what to do next. The letter will confirm the date we made the decision. And even if you're not eligible for the NDIS, we can support the participant to connect with the local area coordinator, and they can help and assist to access other services. And we've got this information as well about the other types of services available, even if someone's not eligible for the NDIS. And Tom will go into a bit more detail when he presents. There's lots of resources and information that have been developed that help you in your role as a GP. On our website, we've got learning modules, we've got extensive set of FAQs around applying to access the NDIS, questions around eligibility and medical conditions, supporting evidence questions, and what sort of supports the NDIS does provide and what we don't provide. We've got practical scenarios and video libraries, and also resources for patients who might be going to visit their GP to help them access the NDIS and fill out that access request form. There's also the link to the access form and fact sheet, which I'll be sharing in the resource pack. The resources have been developed with the Royal Australian College of GP, Royal Australasian College of GP. So it has been designed, those resources, for GPs. There are also lots of practical resources to support people with this psychosocial disability, and they're harder to engage with to access the scheme. And that's the TSP for All, which is developed by the Flinders University. And they've got lots of templates, including a GP template to support the access request. Project Embark supports people with a mental illness who are experiencing a risk of homelessness, and skills and resources to support them to access the scheme. And there's also, for homelessness service, lots of guides out there as well. So please take a look if you get the opportunity. That's it from me. I don't know if we're pausing now for questions or we're going to hold them to the end. But thank you for joining tonight.
Thank you so much, Rhiannon. That was really helpful. I advise all of you to look at the TSP for All site. I looked at that last night and it's excellent. It has really good templates on how to do these forms, because yep, I've got the question that Jeffrin's asking, and it is really complicated. I agree. We're going to answer that question at the end, Jeffrin. So next we're going to have Cheyenne Moody and Kirsten Nowak with the PHN. They're going to go over the Hunter, New England, and Central Coast pathways for access to psychosocial support. All right, thanks, Cheyenne and Kirsten.
Thank you. So providing resources to support GPs and other health professionals, the Health Pathways teams for both Hunter, New England and Central Coast regions have recently revamped and updated key pages related to psychosocial supports. This is to assist with identifying the most appropriate referral pathway for their patients. As you can see on the screen, the Health Pathways sites for both Hunter, New England and Central Coast have separate login credentials. These will be provided for you in an email following this webinar session, along with the resource pack Rhiannon was speaking about. And we will also send, we're about to go over three different pages that relate to psychosocial support, including the NDIS page. We'll send the links to these direct pages as well following this session. So we will now quickly take you through and highlight the psychosocial referral pathways on the updated pages. And then Tom, the next presenter, he will go into more detail around that specific NDIS pathway and decision support tool that is now available to improve the efficiency and understanding of how to best support a patient to access psychosocial support and that application process that Rhiannon spoke to. Tom will go into in a bit more detail. So the pages that we will show you can be used for patients who are accessing the NDIS, as well as those who are eligible for or in the process of applying for the NDIS. The first page that we will show you is, okay, so we're looking at the Central Coast page. Yeah, it's been updated. It looks very similar to the H&E Pathways page. So we're going to be looking at the Central Coast page first. And it's the social prescribing page. On H&E Health Pathways or Hunter, New England, there is a corresponding but differently titled loneliness page. This is about connecting people to social support in their community. To get to the social prescribing page, you click on mental health and then mental health referrals. then mental health, psychosocial support, then social prescribing. The other functionality in the Health Pathways pages is to use the search bar at the top. You can simply type social prescribing in that search box there if you'd prefer to go directly to the page. This page provides information on social prescription that a patient could receive alongside their clinical treatment or as a standalone treatment. The next page I'd like to share with you is the non-clinical community mental health support page. This one we'll be showing you is on Hunter New England Health Pathways. But there is the same page with the same title is also on the Central Coast page. To get to the non-clinical mental health, community mental health support page, click Mental Health, Referral to Specialist Mental Health Services, and click on Non-clinical Community Mental Health Support page. The information on this page is related to psychosocial supports that are available locally. You can see there it's broken down into sub-regions. Some of these supports include the Commonwealth psychosocial support providers. These are providers commissioned by the Primary Health Network to deliver psychosocial support to people who are not currently accessing the NDIS funded psychosocial support, but are living with severe mental illness. Other services on this page include the Service Connect line, which helps connect people with severe mental illness to appropriate psychosocial supports, which can include financial counselling, domestic violence support, housing support, and so on, including 2 services to support the application for NDIS. So lastly, the NDIS page we'll navigate to. It provides guidance on how to support a patient to check eligibility for, as Rhiannon was referring to, and apply for the NDIS. During the updates of these pages, we worked very closely with Rhiannon and Tom to ensure that that information that Rhiannon has provided today in this session is matching the information that's on the page today. So to get to the NDIS page, click Our Health System, then the National Disability Insurance Scheme page. Or again, you can use that search function at the top and simply type National Disability Insurance Scheme or NDIS, and it will bring this page up for you. There is a specific section on this page that covers severe mental illness, and this section provides further support and information on helping a patient with severe mental illness. So the entire page for both Hunter New England and Central Coast has been updated, but tonight we're just going to focus on the severe mental illness section. You'll see that the early intervention section is there. There's 3 key sections, and we're just going to focus specifically on this severe mental illness related to psychosocial disability. The PHN has also designed a decision support tool to help health professionals access appropriate information and resources, including the TSP portal that Rhiannon spoke about, and resources that are relevant to their patients in an efficient timeframe. And Tom will now go into further detail on this whole section, the severe mental health section of this NDIS page. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
All right, thank you very much, Cheyenne and Kirsten. So next up we have Tom. Tom Palmer is a Uniting Local Access Coordinator, Project Officer for the Hunter New England region. Uniting Local Access Coordination is the partner in the community for the NDIS. And Tom's role varies from providing support with accessing the scheme through to developing and implementing projects to address challenges faced by people with disabilities in our communities. I highly recommend you guys call the LAC, the local area coordinators. I've done this and it's just fabulous. They can show you what to do and they can tell you what to do. So thank you, Tom, for being here. This is great that you're here today to talk to us.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I am going to start with a little bit of information about how the LAC program works. So Shane, if you could hit the present button, make that nice and big.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just have to swap my screens around because it wants to be sharing on the other slide. So just bear with me for a minute so I can do that. Sorry, everybody. Wonder what's happening. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why it's playing up on me like this.
That's okay, Cheyenne. And just a reminder to everyone to please pop any questions you have into the questions box. We'll get to that at the end of the session. And like we've been discussing, there will be an email coming out with a resource pack and a copy of resource sheets, and they'll also be available in our education library as well.
Okay, maybe, sorry everyone, it might be because I was presenting the other screen.
Beautiful.
There we go, Tom.
Awesome. All right. So because I don't have control, I'll just get you to go to the next slide. And I'm going to try and be a bit clever about looking at both screens at once. The NDIS is designed to support Australians who have permanent and significant disabilities. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach to disability support. It's designed to be individualised. NDIS support and access will look different for every person. Now, I know that Rhiannon's gone over a bit of that. I just wanted to briefly touch on it again, with the key point there being that the access process is going to look different for each person. One of the things that we see a lot of my work personally with access is GPs who said, oh, you know, like I did the same thing for another customer who had BPD and they got access. This customer hasn't. How does that make any sense? Hopefully that we're going to clarify a bit more of that going through. The next slide. So again, Rhiannon touched on this, but I'll go into it from my perspective. The NDIS is one part of a broader support system. So there's a bit of a running joke in the LAC office about this graphic because we think it looks very confusing and doesn't really help. But what its goal is that it shows that the NDIS doesn't operate as an everything support for people with disabilities. It goes in as a part of the network of supports, informal supports being family members, friends, neighbours, the bus driver that helps the person remember their route when they wouldn't necessarily themselves. That they all fall into informal supports. Community supports are community organisations like your men's sheds, local sporting club, and then you've got government services like you guys, GPs, the health system, etc. The NDIS is designed to complement these existing services and supports, not replace them. The scheme is not designed to take away the support given by family and friends or what we call informal supports. The scheme is not designed to remove a person with disability from their community, and it's not designed to replace what the Medicare system does or replace the education department. The NDIS is designed to work holistically with all of these other natural supports that we already have in our lives. It's important to keep in mind when supporting your patients through the access process, referring to the correct supports throughout and providing the support that's most appropriately provided through Medicare. Next slide, if you would. So this is an example of some of the other options that you have when you have a customer with a disability. Is the NDIS the best and most appropriate support system for the person? When you keep all of those things in mind, a really good example of this is a customer who would benefit from psychology. GPs, obviously very aware of the various Medicare line items that you can refer to psychology. There are also circumstances in which an NDIS plan can pay for psychology. But when you get down to the nitty and gritty of it, it's about, is this most appropriately funded by the Department of Health because it is treating, I can't remember the terminology that Rhiannon used, but I really liked it. I think it was clinically treating the impact rather than helping the customer with their, if it's not going to change the clinical outcome, then it's not treating and it is permanent. So in that case, if it's not treating the impact clinically, then it is the responsibility of the NDIS. But in the cases where you expect to see an actual decrease in impairment based on that psychology, then it's most appropriately funded by the health system. Next slide. So there are 2 partners in the community for each area. We've got the ECEI, Early Childhood Early Intervention Partner, which is for 0 to 6 years, and the Local Area Coordinator Partner, which is 7 to 65. In the Hunter, New England area, which is where I'm based, we are the partners with the LAC partner, and Northcott are the ECEI partner. In the Central Coast, which I think some of you guys are from, you've got Social Futures as the LAC partner, and I didn't do my research and check out the ECEI partner, I'm sorry, but we're going to show you where all of that's available to find in the next couple of steps. Next slide. So this is how you can connect customers with us. We've got a referral form, available through the website. The LACs can help with connection to community and government services. So this is what Rhiannon was talking about earlier, saying that if a customer's not eligible, if you don't believe that they're eligible, and we need to find out what those community and mainstream supports are that could give them the support they need if it's not the NDIS, that is part of what we are funded to do. We can also provide support and guidance for NDIS applications. So you can contact us if you have a patient or client who has the NDIS and isn't utilizing it properly. Funding not utilized could be that they're on lengthy wait lists, not knowing what to do with their plan, not connected to the right services, or language barriers, and all of those sorts of things we can try and help with. We can reconnect that person. If you're not sure what LAC partner would support a person, we can put you in the right direction. So if you've got a customer in a different area, you can always reach out to us anyway. Your local LAC office can support you with the access process, and we're very aware that it can be challenging. One of the reasons for this is the difference between the medical and social models of disability, using language which, while being correct, can also be a barrier to gaining access to the NDIS. Next slide. So what's the need here? We've got, this is specifically talking now about our customers with psychosocial disabilities. These are very common, not always, but very common to see with psychosocial disability. So we've got a lack of informal support. Many people living with psychosocial disability have lost contact with or never had the family or friends that other people with disabilities have to support them in the access process to the NDIS. If they're, if they're eligible for the NDIS and we get them access, then they're going to have the support that they need built into their plan or found in other organizations. But at this point, they may not have that. So the first point of contact, the one that they've gone to for a cold, you guys are the front line on this point. They often have a disconnection and or distrust of government organizations. Whether it's accurate or not, the feeling that you've been abandoned or mistreated by an organization is not easy to shake. For patients in this situation, you might find that you're their only connection to services, and as such are in the best position to help them in getting the support that they need. Low income. If you have deep enough pockets to pay for psychological and functional assessments and further appointments if the reports provided don't cover the access criteria, then the process is a little bit more straightforward. Unfortunately, this is a substantial barrier for most, not to mention those who aren't holding down jobs or managing their money very well. And then, of course, we've got a lack of motivation. And lack of motivation isn't about being laziness. Psychosocial disability is broad in nature, and because of this, you're likely to see many types of access challenges, not the least of which will be people who need support and aren't motivated to get that support. Whether that's not motivated because they don't think they need it, not motivated because of comorbidities of depression, but a lack of motivation is very common in psychosocial, unfortunately. When looking at these and other specific access challenges, it's clear to see that GPs are in a unique position to support people with psychosocial disabilities in accessing the NDIS. Go to the next one for me. So how is this support achieved? Building the capacity of informal supports. We discussed a lack of informal support, however, that's not the case for everyone. It's important that if these supports exist, they are utilised. In this situation, your time may be best invested explaining the NDIS and access process with your patients' informal support, building their capacity to do it themselves. Helping with an access request. So the first step to accessing the NDIS is an access request. This can either be in the form of Section 1 of the access request form, known as an ARF, or by calling the NDIS and doing a verbal access request, known as a VAR. If your patient doesn't have support to make a request themselves, this is a valuable way to get the ball rolling. In this case, you can support with the ARF or the VAR, it gets them on the radar. Referring for evidence, the evidence of psychosocial disability is more complex than other types of disability. Depending on the patient's history, the first step may actually be referral for assessment and diagnosis. If you know of a diagnosis but don't know the specifics or extent of the impact of the disability, again, it may be that your referral to psychology, etc., is the necessary step. Providing evidence. Providing evidence of disability is certainly the most valuable support you can give if it's appropriate. If you've been treating your patient for some time, you're aware of their treatment, medication or otherwise, and impact on their day-to-day life, then your evidence will benefit their application. Referring to a psychologist that your patient will have to start from the beginning may not necessarily help. It's important to note that if there are reports or if there is an easy access to psychology or psychiatry, that these reports should also be included. Connecting with other supports, whether you're providing support with the access request, the evidence of disability, or neither, there's an opportunity to refer your patients to other supports. Keeping in mind that the NDIS exists to bridge the gaps from other supports, it's important that even if you believe your customer will meet access, they're connected with any other relevant organisations too. Next one. So what's good evidence of disability? This was touched on by Rhiannon. Recent NDIS evidence needs to be recent. Typically, this means the evidence was gathered within the last year or two. Rhiannon's 12 months is more accurate than my year or two, but especially in this case where it's hard to connect people with services, don't be afraid to submit it if it's a little bit older to get it in there. Completed by a treating professional who's relevant to the primary disability. So the NDIS website has information detailing who can provide evidence of which disability. With autism as an example, a pediatrician using DSM-5 diagnostic tool to diagnose autism is accepted, whereas a speech pathologist diagnosing autism will not be accepted. It confirms your primary disability, it confirms the impact of your disability on the different areas of your life. We've discussed this a little bit before, so I'll just move on for now. Describes the previous treatments and outcomes, and describes future treatment options and expected outcomes of those treatments. It's important to highlight that the NDIS can only make a decision based on the information received. The NDIA can request additional information, but this will cause a time delay in the application. If we receive information which goes against the application's request to join the NDIS, this will also be taken into consideration. It's important to include the right information and enough of it, but one of the traps that I see people falling into is providing a decade's worth of hospital discharge paperwork, and some of it's not helpful. So commonly asked questions. My client has applied numerous times, as keeps getting access not met decision. Why? I get asked this all the time, and in specific cases, we can give some feedback. So this is an opportunity where you've got a customer and they've got an access not met decision. It's the correct pathway is reach out to us and we can help. Can a carer provide supporting evidence? Absolutely. A carer cannot confirm a diagnosis, but supporting evidence of the impact on the day-to-day life, if more is needed to be added, a carer is a great person for that. You'll actually see in the evidence of psychosocial disability form that the section, I think it's called section B, I'm having a mind blank, is actually for somebody like a carer in the lives of somebody with a psychosocial disability. How many times can a person apply? Infinite. There is no limit on the amount of applications. Obviously, we know that a system can get clogged by stuff, so we don't want to make unnecessary applications, but it's not a case of 10 and you're out forever. The NDIS makes no impact on any other government benefit. We often have people thinking that once they get the NDIS, their Centrelink might be reduced, but the NDIS is not welfare. The Centrelink and the NDIS are completely separate and will not impact on each other. The only thing to keep in mind there is if they've got a program like a compact, like SASH, that will be discontinued, but everything that SASH included, and likely more, is going to be now look at being justified through the NDIS plan. When they get an NDIS plan, they do not get cash into their bank account. This is largely, no, they don't, because they are the masters of their plan, and within the flexibility of the different funding brackets, they can use it as is reasonable and necessary, and as their needs come up. So the money doesn't go into their bank account except for people who self-manage. Now that's a very specific case, and we could talk, we do actually, Uniting LHC have a whole lot of videos, informationals on the self-management process. So I encourage you to reach out if you would like those resources, or just head to the Uniting LHC website. You can find those. But largely speaking, the money isn't to be paid to the customer. It's directly just for services. Now, what we're going to do last to wrap up is walk through the support tool that the PHN has developed. And the goal of this was to take what is quite a complex process that involves potentially multiple people providing evidence and lots of moving parts, lots of questions, and really breaks it down into one kind of interactive flow chart for you. So you can see on this page, you've got the three kind of sections we're going to move through. We've got the eligibility questions, access request process, and evidence of psychosocial disability. Starting at the top, the goal here is that you don't have to necessarily memorize every single part about it. You can just click through, and within a few clicks, you'll have the questions and then whether to keep moving through the process or not. So like, let's say at this point, very first thing, you started to think about their disability, you think they might need access, and you've realized, oh, hang on, they're actually not permanently residing in Australia. They've mentioned that they are expat living in Thailand, and they're just over here for a couple of months. So they're not going to be eligible based on that category, even if they are an Australian citizen. You hit no to that. Then you'll get the referral pathway to the LAC program, because even though they are living with a disability, they're not eligible for the NDIS. They are still going to be eligible for all sorts of other programs, whether they're community organisations that might help support the customer, or other mainstream related stuff. So that referral pathway right there for you. If we say now this person is a permanent resident and citizen, and we hit yes, we move through to the next eligibility criteria. Again, if you click no to this, say they're below 7, you need to refer to ECEI, that information's there. If they're over 65 and you're referring to aged care, the information's there. So now we have an eligible residency and an eligible age. This one is kind of a sub-question to the other. An interesting thing about the NDIS is that if you get the application in before the 65th birthday, the application process can continue after the 65th birthday. If at the time that you've got the customer there, they're 64, but they're going to turn 65 next week, and there's no way you can get the application in that time, then you should start preparing for the My Aged Care process rather than the NDIS process. So again, if you hit no to that, you'll get the referral to My Aged Care. But let's say we're going to get the application in by 65. Does the mental health condition cause permanent or likely to be permanent psychosocial disability? Again, we are aware that a lot of this is not going to be constantly talked about. So that information there, by just clicking psychosocial disability, going to pop up and help you to determine if this customer's mental health condition is going to be considered a psychosocial disability. You can also click through that to the glossary that the NDIS provides. And that document's right there at your fingertips too. So going back to the form one more time. So let's say it does. Oh, sorry. If it doesn't, you'll get the referral pathways out again. And if it does, the LAC program being the right referral pathway. And now we've got the significant impact. So if you remember, Rhiannon was saying permanent and significant. Permanence was the last question. Now we've got significant. What's reduced functionality and mental health access snapshot series, both there to help you determine the answer to that question. And once again, if that was a no, it'll be a referral to the LAC program. And if it's a yes, we move on again. We're now in the access request process. So that was eligibility. Now that we've determined that the customer is eligible, we're going to look at the access request process. Has the patient completed an access request with the NDIA already? As in, do they have the ARF form? Have they sent one in? Have they done the VAR before the appointment? Yes, no, or not sure. Yes is simple. We can move on from this step. No, we'll start looking at whether you can do it. And not sure, same sort of process. Does the patient have informal support available to complete an access request with the NDIA? So this is what we were talking about before. It's very important that you build the capacity of any family members or close friend, the informal supports around the customer if they exist. If they do have that, then a yes will this is to book the next appointment to go into the third section, which we were talking about, which is evidence, which is why it's popped up down there. And then if you hit no, the pathway for supporting in the access request pops up. So if the GP is providing support to complete the access request today, then great, we'd move on. If it's no, then it'll just be a prompt to book a long appointment. If it's a yes, and we can actually move through doing it today, then there's steps there. Making a call to the NDIS with the patient, so you can make a verbal access request, or filling in section 1 of the ARF. So now we move into the evidence of psychosocial disability form. Will the GP be filling in the evidence of psychosocial disability form section A? So this is to be completed by the applicant's psychiatrist, GP, or most appropriate clinician. As we discussed a little bit before, if your history with the patient outweighs anything that you can find or anyone you can refer them to, then you're the most relevant professional. But if there is a standing history with a psychiatrist or the hospital or somebody else that you can refer to, then you would indicate no to that and you'd move on to the next section. But for now, we're going to indicate yes. Oh, sorry, no, there's one more pathway I'll explain. So if you don't have history with this patient, and if you can't fill it out, we're going to hit no to that. Is the patient engaged with a psychiatrist or psychologist who can complete section 8? So this is to catch the circumstance where you don't have the background to do it yourself, but maybe they don't have that themselves. So if you hit no to that, it's going to be about referring to get them to see that psychologist or psychiatrist. Referral out for support to connect with psychosocial support for access to support engage with clinicians. And then that moves on to section B. If we go right back up to the first evidence question and indicate that yes, the GP is going to fill that out, then GP to fill out section A during consult. I believe that will link to information on filling out that section, but it's not there just yet. Filling in the evidence of psychosocial disability form, section B, it's to be completed by the applicant's support worker or appropriate person. This one's interesting because if there is no support worker engaged, no social worker, no caseworker, no informal supports, then again, the GP, you might be the most relevant person to fill out that section of the form. If you hit appropriate person, you get some information on that. So you don't have to remember all of this. The goal is that it's all just sitting there throughout the process. So if you're not, it's a very similar pathway to before. Do they have somebody? And if they do, you're trying to pass on the information that they need to do section B. So send communication to appropriate person. And if they don't, again, refer out to that service that might be able to help. So if you happen to be the most appropriate person, then you would indicate yes to that one. Again, now that you said you've got that supporting evidence FAQ, we've got some information on how to fill that out. But by following that flowchart, we've actually gotten to the end of the access process. So with other supporting evidence, if we happen to have a customer that's got other reports and you can get those together, then that's excellent. But the most simple, straightforward pathway is either the ARF or the VAR, just the section 1 of ARF, which we did further up in the questions, and then flowing through section A and section B of the EOPDs and submit it. So try to keep it very straightforward. One page, you can click out to more information if you need to delve deeper. But that's this, I think it's a brilliant resource that the PHM have developed, and I'm looking forward to hearing lots of feedback and seeing lots of well-completed applications and catching lots of people who need the support. Now, just for those who are in the Hunter New England area, with Uniting LAC being the partner in the community, you can reach out to myself. We'll make sure that my contact details are shared, and anything along this pathway, you're welcome to myself, and I've got a colleague further up north, Steve. We're accessible to you, and south of whatever the Central Coast border is, that'll be social futures as well. If you're ever unsure, the NDIS website has a find an office search, and you can put in your customer's postcode and it'll bring up the closest people to them. Thanks for coming along, everyone, and I'll pass back to...
Thank you, Tom. That was excellent. That was really practical. That was the first time I saw that PHN tool. Fantastic. We're getting closer to making this a little bit more easy for us GPs. I know you all GPs out there, I know when we get those forms, we're like, no, it's a long form to fill out. And so I've got a question here. So any questions, please pop them in the questions menu here. So we've got a question here about the obligation to fill out the NDIS forms. And the question is it the GP's obligation to fill out NDIS application form? Can we refuse to fill out the form? If yes, who to refer to do the form? It's absolutely complicated, lengthy form, which needs lots of clerical time. It doesn't seem to be suitable for GPs. Anybody want to take that question? I think there's been a lot of kind of answers to that. That was at the very beginning of the talk.
Yeah, look, I'll add something. This has been endorsed by the Royal College of General Practitioners as something that GPs should be assisting and what your role is, and that's in the fact sheet. And I understand, that often it does take time. There are MBS medical MBS items that you can bill, and the Central and Eastern Primary Health Network, and I think one in Victoria as well, has put a fact sheet together around what MBS items you could be using to be able to bill appropriately. For someone who has a sister with an intellectual disability, I know that the NDIS, having the right supports in her life, has better health outcomes for her. I've already seen it. She's actually recently lost 10 kilos because she's actually got the right support now, getting her out and about and motivated because she's feeling confident and happy, living independently with the right drop-in supports in a supportive environment. So I think if your passion is around helping people to become, be determinants of their own health needs, it's something, getting the right supports and assisting people, it's a critical pathway for them to improve those health outcomes. It kind of goes hand in hand. I don't know, Tom, if you wanted to add anything else to that.
Yeah, you've nailed it there with the health outcomes, right? If the reason that we're investing any time in customers is to see the best outcome, then there's no doubt that especially the people who don't have connection with other services or don't have their informal supports, like GPs are the right people to do this. And the goal of this project and others like the fact sheet are to set you up to not have to take more time than you can already allocate.
Yeah.
You would have seen that the form a couple of times said book in a long consult. Try and make sure that, you know, we all take steps outside of what is actually required of our roles to try and do the right thing by like our fellow humans. So I'm sure that's not the question that you're asking, but how do we make it the most correct process? And yeah, that's through projects like this. So I hope that everything that we've talked about today can be taken on board and lean on us, lean on the partner in the community program, lean on informal supports that are there. And yeah, hopefully, like ideally, you don't have to fill out too many forms. It's just about equipping GPs and other clinical professionals to do these things once and do it right.
Yep. Call your
yeah.
That's
call us. Call us.
You guys have been great for when I've had problems with it. So yeah, they'll help you. All right, the next question is question about patients that have an NDIS package, but it was done through another practitioner, another provider, and the GP is not getting any information about what's going on, what kind of services this person's getting, and this GP wants to be in the loop. How can we be more in the loop and hear what's going on with our patients through the NDIS?
Yeah, look, it might be about filling in a third-party consent form, and that's with the patient just to say that they agree. You've got to remember, you know, federal Commonwealth legislation, privacy is a big thing, and you may have put your name to an access form, and that's not active on the person's file. That's something the NDIS is looking at improving, how we manage relationships related to the person. But definitely there's the third-party consent form that you could get the person to fill in, and that then gives us consent to act on their behalf or get access to information, including even a copy of the plan if the participant consents to that. That could be a good way of being kept in the loop.
Yeah, great answer. That's really important because
Tom, I don't know if
what's happened with me in the past is I've called in and I said, I'm the person's GP, and I even did the NDIS form, and they said, no, we can't give you any information. But I'm like, I'm the one that wrote the form up. And they said, no, that you need to get third-party consent. And for us GPs, it's confusing because we're used to just, you know, automatically having consent to see. So for all of us GPs, we want to get that third-party consent. Yeah.
So I'll add to that. Firstly, whoever that question was, awesome. I think it's great that you want to take a bit more of a part in that because, you know, the support that you provide is separate to the NDIS, but they go hand in hand. We're all cogs in one big machine, and it's brilliant. The third-party consent form is the right way to do it for ongoing. If you have the customer on a call, then their LAC can help. They can give you consent to talk about a specific thing on their behalf. To try and keep it simple, if you just need an answer, like my customer can't clearly tell me if they're seeing an OT or a speech therapist, but you can quickly make that call while they're in the appointment. We can just answer those things over the phone. It's not something that needs to go through a big heavy process.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, it's kind of not concluded, but if a patient has 2 disabilities, but then it didn't finish, so I can't figure that one. How will we do this one? If there's a kid who looks like they have autism, we've had trouble to get them formally assessed by pediatrician or psychologist. Are they still able to get support?
Well, if they're a child under the age of younger than 7, there doesn't need to be any type of diagnosis. It could just be a developmental concern or delay, or so that's, that's calling the early childhood partner, which for your Hunter New England, I believe is LifeStart. Not LifeStart, Northcote. Yeah, Northcote. It might be LifeStart for Central Coast. Is it? Yeah, I think so. We'll make sure we include that in the resource pack, where to find your local early childhood partner. We've done a lot of work around that. Hopefully some of you will run some more sessions around the early childhood connectors and the early childhood approach. We did that a couple of weeks ago with health professionals and invited the PHNs, but we'll continue to do some education in that area. If someone's over the age of 7, it might be, if they don't have a formal diagnosis, sometimes maybe perhaps there's other evidence that the school can provide. And again, think about other people their own age that don't have any disability. What's happening? What's a typical milestone? And if they're not meeting them, that's critical evidence for us to know that something's not right there. They need some sort of additional support or capacity building to build that. And some young people over the age of 7 might then come on to the NDIS if we think that supports will initially help them. It might be early intervention, because if we give them the intense supports now, they may not need that ongoing. But there's some tips if people, a GP could confirm, but we just need, I think, guidance from probably the parent and the school would really help that. Often school counsellors as well are able to provide evidence. Or from, reports or other things where they're just not meeting the age appropriateness, or it could be a psychologist as well.
Okay, great. So it sounds like we could refer the patient through our NDIS pathway if we can see developmental milestones aren't being met or those kind of things. All right, so the next question is, can a client's caseworker complete the application forms?
Yeah, look, if the caseworker is someone like, as I said, we've been doing a lot with homelessness services, and often they're doing a lot of that case coordination for people who don't have any informal supports or have complex needs. And they're usually navigating all of that. And, one of the barriers is trying to get them into a GP or a treating health professional to help them particularly get that evidence. But yeah, a case manager, if they've got some sort of service, there are other mental health services out there too that people might be accessing where that could support that. I think that's what they meant. I'm guessing another service systems case manager. I don't know, Tom, have you come across any other type of mental health services or homelessness services? They're the ones that interface with us the most.
Yeah, there's there are kind of generalized casework organizations as well, but I think to the root of the question, they are definitely the types of people that you might have indicated yes to in those sections, saying, is there support available to fill out these forms? The important things to note are that if they're filling out any of the sections that are to be done by treating professionals, then all they're doing is writing something that, if you're the one who ends up signing it, you're the one signing your name to it. So if you don't have that information, then you'd be signing something that you can't possibly agree with. So the extent that they can fill it in is only to the extent that they are either like authorized to be filling in, or that you're or whoever the other treating professional is willing to say, yes, this is the case, and then sign your name to it. A caseworker couldn't complete the treating professional sections.
No, just supporting evidence around functioning. Yeah.
Good. Okay, I think that's clear.
And the other thing to keep in mind that sometimes happens is that a caseworker accidentally oversteps their mark. I've had access request forms handed in with the caseworker's signature on them instead of the customer. So keeping an eye out for those little things will stop your access request from getting knocked back for something silly, if we can just keep in mind checking those things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, here's the one with the 2 disabilities. If a patient has 2 disabilities and the NDIS determines that the access needs for one are met but not for the other, do they still gain access for the disability where the access needs are met, or do both disabilities have to meet the access criteria for access to be granted?
It's a good question, but 90% of the applications that I see have 2 or more conditions, disabilities, impairments, call them what you will at this point because it's just an application. Then part of the assessment process looks at every single one of those listed conditions and determines whether that there is a disability because of that, whether the disability because of that is permanent, and whether the impairment based on each of them is substantial. So they're all assessed individually. It might be that 3 of them are determined to be permanent and substantial, or just 1. Either way, they'll meet the scheme access based on whichever conditions produce a permanent and significant disability. And then the funding that can be included in a plan can be tied to any of those disabilities that are permanent and substantial, but not the ones that weren't considered permanent and substantial. So to give a clear example, if a customer has ASD level 2 and depression, and there's evidence to suggest that the depression hasn't fully been treated, then that's an easy one, doesn't meet scheme eligibility, but the ASD level 2 does. So now that they're on the scheme and they're having their planning meeting, they're asking for psychology. And nothing in the evidence suggests that the psychology is to do with the ASD level 2, it's to do with their disability. It can't be included in the plan. At that point, they need to be referred for a mental health plan. They can get their psychology through other means. Maybe it's a local organisation like Headspace that's going to do counselling for them. If down the track, they've been on the scheme for ASD level 2 for 5 years and they've been through every treatment pathway and there's nothing that's appropriate for them anymore, and their depression has moved on to a chronic clinical depression that has no more treatment pathways, they can provide evidence of this, and this can be added and therefore can be considered for future plan funding.
Right.
How was that, Rihanna?
Okay,
Yeah, that's good.
So the last, I think this is the last question. So this GP has been able to get his patient NDIS. This patient has an intellectual disability, and it says VCF with intellectual disability. I'm not sure what VCF stands for, sorry. I helped her to get it. Now she's having difficulty getting a job. The disability job providers are not interested to help get her get a job unless she gets job seeker payments. How is this going to be true?
What was that last bit, Mari? I think you just cut out.
She's not able to get a job, and they won't help her to get a job unless she gets job seeker payments, like Centrelink. How is this going to work? Is this true?
Yeah, I need to get a bit more information about that. I'm happy if you want to provide your details. Tom and I can have a look what's going on. Yeah.
So certainly, in terms of this specific situation, we can't comment too much. But if the case is that they're actually referring to DES, which is a funding for disability employment supports, it is through Centrelink, so it's often mistaken. If she's been determined to be not eligible or she hasn't applied for DES yet, then that's a pathway that we'll probably look at. And again, part of my job is to refer to those programs and make sure that she's linked with every support that she can get. So.
Okay, that's it. That's all the questions. I'm going to hand it back over to Mel Wilkinson, who's going to finish our talk off. Thanks to all the speakers and to the people here. And back to Mel.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the presenters and to Marie for being with us tonight. There's been some really interesting engagement and questions that have come through. Any questions that you think of later, you can always email us on education@thephn.com.au, and we'll forward those to the presenters to you as well. I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It's a really important topic, and I'm glad that you all had the opportunity and engagement that we've had tonight. We've got some great numbers online, and just strongly, once again, encourage you to please complete the survey at the end of the session. This gives us the data to plan and to implement further education events. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you to the resources that have been developed on our website, which are amazing. And as we've discussed, they will be available in our education library in the coming days. So thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening. Good night.